Workbench was gone, not moved, not covered with a tarp the way my daughter-in-law sometimes did when she wanted to organize things without actually touching them. Gone. The brackets I'd bolted into the studs myself, still there, holes and all like little wounds in the drywall. But the bench my father built in 1971 from solid white oak, the one that had traveled with me through 3 states and 2 marriages, the one with the small brass plate on the leg that read, "E.H. made to last," was not there. I stood in the doorway of my own garage for a long time. The shop light I'd hung was still on. It hummed the way it always did. My old stool was pushed into the corner. But everything else, the bench, the snap-on rollaway my father left me, the hand planes hanging on the pegboard, the index socket sets, the marking gauges, the dovetail jigs, the wooden mallet I'd turned myself on a lathe in 1994. All of it was gone. I remember thinking the garage had been broken into. I actually turned around and looked at the side door, checked the lock. It was fine. Then I walked back inside and found the note on the kitchen counter, held down by a coffee mug. We cleared out the garage to start on the nursery conversion, gave the tools to the Habitat Restore on Millbrook. The big workbench was too heavy to move, so we sold it to a guy on Facebook Marketplace for $200. Figured you'd be happy to have the space cleared. Just $200. My father spent 3 weeks building that bench. He milled the lumber himself from a white oak that had come down in a storm behind his house in rural Pennsylvania. He mortised the legs by hand, because he didn't trust a router for that kind of joinery. He finished it with linseed oil and left it to cure for a full month before he put anything on it. And my daughter-in-law sold it for $200 to a stranger she found on the internet. While I was in Cleveland for 4 days attending my college roommate's funeral, I sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't say anything. I'm not sure I could have. Let me back up. My name is Bernard. I'm 63 years old. I retired 2 years ago after 31 years as a finish carpenter, commercial and residential, mostly high-end custom work in the Mid-Atlantic region. I built staircases, mantels, built-in libraries, coffered ceilings. I did work in a Georgetown townhouse once that ended up in Architectural Digest. I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying it so you understand that the tools in that garage weren't a hobby. They were my history. They were the instruments of everything I'd ever made with my hands. My father, Earl Hutchins, was a furniture maker in central Pennsylvania his whole life. He never had a shop, just a garage like mine. But what he did in that garage, the chairs, the cabinets, the beds, people drove from 3 counties over to buy his pieces. He died in 2009. Before he did, he called me into that garage and he said, "Bernard, this bench goes with you. You're the only one who will understand what it is." I understood what it was. I always had. I moved it 3 times. When I went through my first divorce in 1998, the bench came with me. When I sold my house in Virginia to move back to Pennsylvania, the bench came with me. It was 11 feet long and weighed 430 pounds. I know because I weighed it once, out of curiosity. Moving it required a trailer and 4 grown men every single time. I did that 3 times because there was no version of my life that didn't include that bench. My son Tyler is 31. He's a good man mostly, works in IT, makes decent money, has his mother's temperament, which means he avoids conflict the way some people avoid gluten. He married Jessica 2 years ago. Jessica is not a bad person either. I want to be clear about that. She is practical in the way that people who have never made anything with their hands tend to be practical. Meaning, she measures value in square footage and resale potential, not in the years of someone's hands embedded in a piece of wood. They moved in with me 14 months ago when their apartment lease ended and the house they were under contract on fell through. I had a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. It made sense, practically. I told them the garage was mine. I said it plainly. The garage is my workspace. My tools stay where they are. That's a condition. Tyler nodded. Jessica smiled the way she smiles when she's already decided something and hasn't told you yet. The pregnancy was announced at Thanksgiving. I was genuinely happy. A grandchild. I'd thought about that. I wanted it. But by Christmas, I could see the way Jessica's eyes moved when she looked at the garage through the kitchen window. Measuring. Calculating. She mentioned once, offhand, that the garage would make such a good nursery if it were insulated. I said the garage was my workshop and we had a perfectly good spare bedroom upstairs. She said the spare bedroom didn't get enough light. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. I was in Cleveland from Tuesday through Friday. My friend Lou had died of a stroke, sudden, no warning, 67 years old, and he'd been talking about finally taking that fishing trip to Montana. I drove out for the service. I stayed a few extra days because his wife needed help and because I needed to sit somewhere quiet and think about mortality the way you do when a man your age who was healthy and laughing last month is suddenly in the ground. I came home on a Friday evening to an empty kitchen and a note under a coffee mug. Here's what I want you to understand about what was taken. The Snap-on rollaway was my father's. KRA 2422 series, 7 drawers, built in the late 1970s. You can't buy that quality anymore. Snap-on's been outsourcing since the 90s, and anyone in the trade will tell you that. It was worth somewhere between $4,000 and $6,000 at auction, depending on condition. The condition was immaculate because I had treated it like a member of the family for 15 years. The hand planes were a collection I'd built over 20 years, 3 Stanley Bedrock planes in near-mint condition, including a 605.5 that I paid $800 for at an estate sale in Lancaster County. A set of wooden molding planes, 12 pieces, that had belonged to a cabinet maker who'd trained in Germany in the 1930s. I'd bought them from his grandson for $1,200. A Lie-Nielsen number 4.5. I'd bought new for $450. Individually, they were worth real money. As a collection, assembled over a career, they were worth considerably more. The marking gauges, the squares, the layout tools. A Starrett combination square I'd owned for 22 years. A set of Veritas marking gauges still in the original box. Chisels, some of them Sheffield-made and no longer in production. And the workbench. The white oak bench my father built. I did not scream. I did not call Tyler immediately. I went into the garage and I stood in the space where the bench had been, and I looked at the wall where the pegboard had been, and I felt something I can only describe as a kind of unmooring, like a rope cut, like being set adrift from your own past. I am not a sentimental man by reputation. I don't cry at movies. I didn't cry at my father's funeral, though I wanted to. But I stood in that empty garage for a very long time, and somewhere in there I started crying, and I didn't stop for a while. Then I stopped. I dried my face. I went inside and I called Tyler. He answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Your wife gave away my tools and sold my father's workbench." There was a long pause. He said, "Dad, she told me she talked to you about the garage." "She did not talk to me about the garage." Another pause. "She said you were okay with converting it." "Tyler, I was in Cleveland burying Lou Ferreira. Your wife cleared out my workshop while I was at a funeral." I heard him exhale slowly. "The stuff at the restore. They probably haven't processed it yet. Maybe we can get it back." "Call them first thing tomorrow morning," I said, "and find out how to reach the man who bought the bench." I slept maybe 2 hours that night. The Habitat Restore on Knowbrook, when Tyler called the next morning, said the donation had already been sorted and a portion of it priced and put on the floor. They'd received the Snap-on rollaway, several boxes of hand tools, and what the intake coordinator described as various woodworking implements. The rollaway had already been tagged and was on the floor. The planes were in a bin mixed with other items. They were being sold for, and I want you to sit with this, between $2 and $12 a piece. $12. For a Stanley Bedrock 605.5. For a set of 19th century German molding planes. Tyler went down there in person. He spoke to the manager. He explained the situation, that the tools had been donated without the owner's consent. The manager was sympathetic but firm. Once items are accepted and processed, they become property of the organization. Tyler called me from the parking lot and said, "Dad, they won't give them back. I'm so sorry." Jessica called me an hour later. She said she was sorry too. She said she hadn't realized the tools were that valuable, that she'd thought they were just old stuff I'd accumulated, that the nursery project had just gotten away from her. She said she hoped I could understand. I said, "Jessica, did you ask me before you removed anything from my garage?" She said she thought Tyler had mentioned it to me. I said, "Did you ask me?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I was trying to do something nice." I said, "You sold my father's workbench for $200 to a stranger on Facebook Marketplace while I was out of town burying my friend." She didn't say anything after that. I want to be fair. I know she didn't do it out of malice. That almost makes it worse. She did it out of a complete and total failure to understand that objects can carry weight that has nothing to do with their market value. She looked at a bench and saw $200 and some floor space. I looked at that bench and saw my father's hands. I saw 40 years of work. I saw the man who taught me what it meant to make something that would outlast you. You cannot explain that to someone who has never felt it. I tried once, years ago, to explain to my first wife why I wouldn't sell my father's hand planes even when money was tight. She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Some people understand that certain objects are load-bearing, not structurally, but spiritually, and some people just don't. I called a lawyer the following week, not to be vindictive. I called because I needed to understand my options. My attorney, a man I'd used for my second divorce and a property dispute in 2019, told me a few things clearly. First, Jessica had no legal right to remove or sell personal property belonging to me from my own home, regardless of the fact that she was living there. Second, the Facebook Marketplace sale was potentially actionable. She had sold property she did not own. Third, the value of the items taken was not trivial, and I had documentation, receipts, photographs, appraisal records I'd kept for insurance purposes that could support a claim. He said, "How do you want to handle this? Because you can handle it quietly inside the family, or you can pursue what you're actually owed." I told him I'd let him know. Tyler came to talk to me that Sunday. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with his hands folded the way he used to sit when he was a teenager and knew he'd done something wrong. He said he was sorry. He said Jessica was sorry. He said Jessica was sorry. He said they'd pay to replace whatever they could. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who I'd taught to use a handsaw when he was 8 years old, who I'd taken to my father's shop and watched his eyes go wide at the smell of wood shavings and oil. And I said, "You cannot replace what she sold." He said, "Dad, it was a mistake. We want to make it right." I said, "Tyler, I told both of you when you moved in here that the garage was my space." I said it out loud. "Your wife decided that her project was more important than my boundary, and she did it while I was 2 states away grieving my friend." He didn't have an answer for that. The man who'd bought the workbench was named Kevin Reese. Tyler found him through the marketplace listing. It was still up. Kevin hadn't deleted it. He bought the bench for a workshop he was setting up in his basement. Tyler reached out to him, explained the situation, asked if he'd be willing to sell it back. Kevin Reese turned out to be a decent man. He was a hobbyist woodworker, just starting out. And when Tyler explained that the bench had belonged to our family for 50 years, that my grandfather, I'll let that inaccuracy stand, had built it by hand, Kevin got quiet. He said he'd paid $200 for it, and he wasn't going to try to profit off the situation. He said we could have it back for what he paid. I drove over with a trailer and 2 men from my former crew, guys I'd worked with for years who I knew I could call. When we got there and I saw the bench sitting in Kevin's basement, something in my chest let go. It was still in good condition. He'd wiped it down, put a mat on it, but otherwise hadn't done anything to it. The brass plate on the leg, EH, made to last, was still there. I shook Kevin's hand. I thanked him. He said, "It's a beautiful piece of work. Whoever made it knew what they were doing." I said, "Yes." He did. The tools from the restore were mostly gone. Some of them I was able to track down and repurchase. The Snap-on rollaway had been bought by a mechanic in Harrisburg who sold it back to me for $1,800, which was below market value, and I was grateful for it. The Stanley Bedrock planes were gone. The German molding planes were gone. A few of the chisels turned up at a flea market 2 months later, and I bought them back for $40. The total loss, after accounting for what I recovered, was somewhere around $9,000 in tools and irreplaceable collection pieces. My lawyer filed a demand letter. Jessica's parents got involved. There were several very unpleasant conversations over the course of 2 weeks. In the end, Jessica and Tyler agreed to pay me $7,500 over 18 months, which my lawyer said was a reasonable settlement given the difficulty of proving exact values in court and the family dynamics involved. It didn't come close to covering the German planes or the Bedrock 605.5. Those are gone. I told Tyler and Jessica they needed to find their own place. I gave them 60 days because Jessica was pregnant and I'm not a monster. They found an apartment about 20 minutes away. They moved out in March. My house is quieter now. The garage is mine again. The bench is back where it belongs against the east wall under the shop light, its surface worn smooth in the exact places where decades of work left their marks. I refinished the top last spring. Just a light pass with a scraper and fresh linseed oil. Nothing aggressive. My father would have approved. I've been spending more time at a woodworking club that meets Thursday evenings at a community workshop in Lancaster. It's a mixed group. Retirees, a few younger guys learning the craft, a woman who makes Windsor chairs professionally and knows more about wood selection than almost anyone I've met. We talk about joinery and finish schedules and the best sources for quality lumber. Nobody tries to clear out my tools while I'm gone. A man there, Gideon, asked me once why I kept so many hand tools in an era when you can do almost anything with a CNC machine. I told him it was because a CNC machine doesn't remember anything. A hand tool carries the memory of every hand that ever used it. You pick up a plane that's been tuned and used by someone who knew what they were doing, and you can feel it in the way the blade sits, the way the mouth is set. It's a conversation across time. He nodded like he understood, because he did. I don't have a lot of anger left about what happened. Some days I do. When I reach for a gauge that isn't there, or when I see a German molding plane listed online for $1,400, and I remember that mine went for $2 in a bin. But mostly what I feel now is something I couldn't have named 6 months ago. The closest I can get to it is this. I had let too many years go by accommodating people who didn't see what I saw, who didn't understand what I valued, who looked at my father's bench and saw floor space. That was my failure as much as theirs. I had gone quiet too many times. I had let the boundary slide because it was easier. The bench is back. What went with it is gone. I'm at peace with most of it. My father built that bench to last. He was right. It has lasted through everything. 3 moves, 2 marriages, 1 devastating Tuesday in October, 100,000 hours of work. It will outlast me, and that's what he intended. I start every morning now by going into the garage and putting my hand flat on the surface of that bench. It's a habit I didn't know I had until I almost didn't have it anymore. The wood is cool in the morning. It smells like oil and oak and thyme. I stand there for a minute before I start work, and I think about my father's hands, and then I think about my own, and then I pick up whatever I was working on the day before, and I continue. I keep thinking about the note. Not what it said, I have that memorized by now, but the fact that it was held down by a coffee mug, like it was just another item on the counter, like it was a grocery list. That's the part that stayed with me the longest, not the missing tools, not the empty pegboard, not even the $200 Facebook post. It was the casualness of it. The complete absence of weight. What happened in that garage wasn't an accident. It was the result of years of small signals I sent and didn't send. I told Tyler the garage was mine when they moved in. I said it plainly, out loud, at the kitchen table. But I never pushed back when Jessica measured the space with her eyes at Christmas dinner. I never said anything when she mentioned the nursery idea a second time. I told myself it was handled. It wasn't. I had set a boundary and then stood far enough back from it that someone could walk right through without feeling much resistance. That's on me. I own that part of it. Here's what I've come to understand. The way other people treat what matters to you is almost always a direct reflection of what you've taught them to expect. Not because they're bad people, but because people take their cues from what you protect and what you leave unguarded. Jessica didn't know the value of those planes. She didn't know what those molding gauges meant or where they came from. But she did know, because I had shown her, over 14 months of quiet accommodation, that the garage was a negotiable space. I taught her that without saying a word. Knowing that doesn't make the German planes hurt less. It doesn't bring back the bedrock 605.5. But it changes how I carry it. The workbench is back where it belongs. I got it back, not by luck, but because I was willing to think clearly when I wanted to fall apart. To call a lawyer. To document what was taken. To pursue what I was owed without apologizing for doing so. That took something I hadn't exercised in a while. The discipline to look at a painful situation without flinching from the parts that were my own fault, and without letting that self-honesty become an excuse to accept less than what was right. My father built that bench to outlast him. He was thinking about time in a way most people don't. He was thinking about what he would leave behind. What would carry his name forward? What would still be standing when he wasn't? That kind of thinking requires a long view. It requires you to believe that what you make and how you live actually matters past the moment you're living in. I think about that now when I go into the garage in the morning. The bench is there. The shop light hums. I put my hand flat on the oak and I think about what I'm building. Not just in wood, but in how I show up. What I protect, what I insist on. My father didn't complain about the years it took to build something worth keeping. He just built it. I'm still learning to do the same.